His voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk, and every candle seemed to hold its breath. She will not burn. She is my queen. The words fell upon the crowd like thunder, and I felt my legs weaken beneath me. Not from shame, but from the crushing weight of those syllables. Queen.
She is my queen.
From the dust before everyone, transforming the accused into the untouchable, and the air itself seemed to crack with the shock of it. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The flames still burned inside me when they dragged me from the square, as if fire had pierced through skin and scorched my soul in silence. It was not real fire. That never touched me. But the fury of hundreds of eyes that stripped me bare before the world, screaming my name like a sentence, spitting words that burned hotter than torches. "Witch," they murmured. And the wind seemed to carry the accusation so that no corner of the kingdom would remain without hearing. I did not cry. Dry pride caught in my throat was my only shield, and my clenched fists held the memory of my mother, who had departed without ever being defended. I was the bastard daughter, the shameful shadow that my father's family hid in the coldest corners of the house. Raised between cracks of closed doors, learning to listen without being noticed, to silence myself when my heart wanted to scream. Since childhood, I had been marked by the iron collar they gave me, a chain disguised as adornment. They said it was for my protection, but everyone knew it was a reminder of my place, always below, always beneath. The weight of that metal against my collarbone reminded me with every breath that I was living proof of a mistake no one wanted to claim. That day, however, they did not drag me to the fire for my silence, but for my voice. A servant had sworn she saw me beneath the moon, whispering alone among the garden trees as if conjuring spirits. It was nothing more than my refuge, an attempt to converse with memories the wind carried, but it was enough for those who envied me to find their chance. The next morning, ladies in heavy dresses gathered in a circle, sharpening their tongues like blades. My cousins, with their cruel smiles, were the first to insinuate that I brought bad luck to the house. With each whisper, the net of accusations grew, and I was the fish caught, airless. My father had never acknowledged me publicly. I was the consequence of a night he wished to forget, born of a woman whose name was never spoken in polite company. My mother had been beautiful, they said, with eyes like amber and hair that caught firelight. She had worked in the kitchens, and somehow she had caught his attention. One stolen moment had created me, and one winter fever had taken her when I was barely 5 years old. After that, I became the inconvenient truth living under his roof, the stain on his honor that could neither be erased nor openly displayed. The legitimate children, 3 daughters and 2 sons, had learned from birth to look through me as if I were glass. Their mother, my father's wife, had perfected the art of cold dismissal. She never raised her voice to me, never struck me, for that would have required acknowledging my existence. Instead, she assigned me the smallest room, the plainest clothes, the last servings at meals. The iron collar had been her idea, presented as a gift on my 10th birthday. Protection against evil spirits, she had said with a smile sharp as winter frost, though everyone understood its true meaning. It marked me as property, as less than family, as something to be controlled. I learned to move through the manor like a ghost, present but unseen, necessary but unwanted. I learned which floorboards creaked, which servants would meet my eyes with sympathy, which corridors to avoid when my half-siblings entertained their friends. I learned to swallow humiliation like daily bread, to let insults slide off my skin like water, to find small freedoms in the moments no one was watching. The garden became my sanctuary, particularly the old oak grove at the far edge of the property, where I could sit among roots older than any grudge and pretend, for just a moment, that I belonged somewhere. It was in that grove where the servant claimed to have seen me practicing witchcraft. Marjorie, a girl not much older than myself, who had always watched me with a mixture of fear and fascination. I had been speaking aloud, yes, talking to the memory of my mother, asking the trees if they remembered her footsteps, wondering if the wind still carried her laughter. Lonely grief makes us all speak to shadows. But Marjorie had heard only fragments, seen only a girl alone beneath moonlight, moving her hands as if weaving invisible threads. and her imagination had filled in the rest. The accusations spread through the household like sickness. Within a day, every misfortune of the past year was laid at my feet. Crops had failed? Surely my curse. The youngest legitimate son had taken ill? Obviously my doing. A valuable necklace had gone missing? Who else but the witch child would have stolen it? The logic was circular and absolute. I was already outcast, already other, already marked by that iron collar. Why should they not believe I trafficked with darkness? My father said nothing in my defense. He looked at me across the dinner table that night, his eyes hollow and tired, and I saw in them not cruelty but surrender. He had spent years pretending I did not matter, and now that pretense had made it impossible to protect me. To defend me would be to admit he had failed me, and he could not bear that revelation. So he sat silent while his wife murmured about the necessity of cleansing evil from their home, while his legitimate daughters whispered behind their hands, while his sons debated whether burning or drowning was the more merciful purification. The decision was made without me present. I learned my fate from the guards who came to my room before dawn, heavy men with expressionless faces who bound my wrists and led me down through the manor I had haunted for 19 years. The iron collar felt heavier than ever against my throat, cold metal warming slowly with the heat of my skin, a paradox I had lived with so long it had become part of my heartbeat. They took me to the cellars, to a room with stone walls that wept moisture and a single barred window too high to reach. There they left me to wait for judgment. I do not know how many hours passed in that darkness. Time loses meaning when your future has narrowed to a single burning point. I thought of my mother, tried to remember her voice, the songs she used to sing while working. I thought of all the small kindnesses I had received, the cook who always saved me extra bread, the stable boy who had taught me to whistle, the old groundskeeper who let me help with the gardens. I thought of spring mornings and autumn leaves and winter snow, all the beautiful moments I had managed to steal from a life that wanted me invisible. I did not think of flames. I refused to give them that power before they had even touched me. When they came for me again, the sun was high and hot. They dressed me in a plain white shift, the kind reserved for the condemned, and led me through streets I had never been allowed to walk freely. People lined the way, some jeering, some merely curious, some with pity in their eyes, quickly hidden. Children threw rotten vegetables and called me names they had learned from their parents. Women clutched at charms and prayer beads, protecting themselves from my supposed corruption. Men stared with the particular interest reserved for young women about to die, a hunger that had nothing to do with justice. The square was packed. A platform had been erected in the center, and upon it stood the stake, dark wood reaching toward the sky like an accusation. Kindling was piled at its base, dry branches and straw that would catch quickly, burn hot. The sight of it sent ice through my veins even as the summer sun beat down on my shoulders. This was real. This was happening. There would be no last-moment reprieve, no sudden revelation of innocence. They had decided I was guilty, and guilty I would die. It was in the great hall, illuminated by candelabras that looked like burning eyes, that my fate had been announced hours before. The air had smelled of smoke and melted wax as if the fire already waited for me. The nobles laughed quietly, delighting in the imminent tragedy. And my stepmother, always erect, always immaculate, maintained a satisfied half-smile, like someone finally watching the weed being pulled from the garden. I had stood tall, the collar cold against my neck, trying not to tremble, trying to appear more stone than flesh. The accusations had been presented with theatrical flair. Marjorie had stood before the assembly, her voice shaking with either fear or excitement, describing what she claimed to have witnessed. She embellished, I could tell, adding details that made the story more dramatic, more damning. She said I had been drawing symbols in the dirt, speaking in tongues, that my eyes had glowed with unnatural light. None of it was true, but truth had ceased to matter. The narrative had been written, and I was merely the puppet acting out their predetermined script. Others had come forward after her, each adding their own testimony. The gardener swore he had seen me talking to ravens, who answered back in human voices. A kitchen maid claimed I had spoiled milk simply by looking at it. One of my cousins, the eldest daughter with the sweetest public smile and the cruelest private tongue, tearfully confessed that I had threatened her with curses when she tried to be kind to me. The lies piled up like kindling, each On feeding the flames of certainty, and I stood silent because what defense could I offer? To protest would only confirm their suspicions. The guilty always claim innocence. Through it all, my father had sat in his chair, his face a mask of studied neutrality. He would not condemn me himself, but neither would he save me. He was a coward, I realized, not a villain. He lacked the strength to be either truly cruel or truly kind. He existed in the grey space between, and that grey space had no room for a daughter born of shame. His wife sat beside him, her hand occasionally touching his arm in what might have looked like comfort, but was really control, ensuring he maintained his silence. The magistrate had pronounced the sentence with all the weight of law and tradition, burning at the stake, to be carried out at noon the following day, so that all might witness and be reminded of the price of consorting with darkness. The crowd in the hall had received the news with varied reactions. Some applauded, righteous in their certainty. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the spectacle but unwilling to challenge it. And some, a very few, looked at me with something like recognition, as if they saw in my fate the shadow of their own vulnerability. Now, standing in the square with rough hands guiding me toward the platform, I felt strangely calm. Perhaps this was shock, the body's mercy when the mind can no longer process horror. Perhaps it was acceptance, the final surrender to forces beyond my control. Or perhaps it was simply exhaustion, the accumulated weight of 19 years of being unwanted finally crushing the last of my resistance. I climbed the steps to the platform with steady feet, refusing to stumble, refusing to beg. If they wanted me to play the witch, I would at least play her with dignity. They bound me to the stake with practiced efficiency, men who had done this before, whose hands moved with the casual certainty of routine. The ropes bit into my arms, rough hemp against soft skin, tight enough to prevent escape, but not quite tight enough to stop circulation. They wanted me conscious for what came next. The crowd pressed closer, a wall of faces blurring together into a single entity of judgment and anticipation. I could smell their sweat, their perfumes, the ale on their breath. I could feel the heat of the sun and the heat of their collective gaze, both burning in different ways. The priest began to pray, a long, droning invocation meant to cleanse my soul before its departure. His words washed over me without meaning, liturgical language I had heard all my life, but never truly been invited to embrace. The church had never wanted bastards in its sanctuaries, had never offered me the comfort of belonging to something greater. Now it claimed the right to sanctify my death, and the hypocrisy of it might have made me laugh if my throat had not been so tight with suppressed fear. Someone in the crowd threw a stone. It struck my shoulder, sharp pain blossoming across my skin, and I heard laughter following it. Others took it as permission, and soon more projectiles flew, most missing, some finding their mark. My cheek split open. My ribs ached where a larger rock had connected. Blood ran warm and sticky down my face, metallic taste filling my mouth when I pressed my tongue against the inside of my cheek. The priest continued his prayers, unbothered by the violence, as if my suffering before the flames was part of the ceremony. Then everything changed. The air shifted, pressure building like before a storm, and a hush fell over the crowd so sudden it felt like violence itself. The stone throwers lowered their arms. The shouters closed their mouths. Even the priest stumbled over his words before falling silent. I felt it before I saw it, a presence that commanded attention without demanding it, power that needed no announcement. He entered the square, and the world rearranged itself around him. I had never seen the king before. The royal family visited our region rarely, preferring the capital with its greater comforts and securities. But everyone knew of him, stories traded in whispers and tavern songs. They called him the Alpha, a title older than the throne itself, tied to bloodlines that predated kingdoms. They said he had never lost a battle, never shown mercy to enemies, never backed down from any challenge. They said his eyes could see through lies, his voice could command wolves, his presence could make strong men kneel without a single word. I had dismissed most of it as legend, the kind of mythology that grew around powerful men like moss on old stones. But seeing him now, I understood the stories had been inadequate. He was tall, but that was the least remarkable thing about him. He moved with the fluid certainty of a predator, each step deliberate and economical, containing the promise of explosive violence barely leashed. He wore black leather and wool cut close to a body that spoke of constant training, constant readiness. His hair was dark as raven wings, long enough to touch his shoulders, and his features were carved from something harder than marble. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. And his eyes, those eyes that stories spoke of, were the color of midnight waters, so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Those eyes found mine across the crowd, across the space that separated the platform from the edge of the square. And the impact of that gaze hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught, my heart stuttered and then raced, drumming against the cage of my ribs so hard I thought it might crack bone. The iron collar around my neck suddenly felt different, not like a chain but like a lie, something false that this man's attention had the power to unmake. He did not look away, did not scan the crowd for context, did not seek the officials who should have been explaining the scene. His focus remained fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin prickle with heat, despite the terror of my situation. I felt seen, truly seen for perhaps the first time in my life. Not as a bastard, not as a witch, not as an inconvenience or a scandal, but as a person, as someone who mattered enough to hold the attention of the most powerful man in the kingdom. The officials finally noticed him, and panic rippled through their ranks. The magistrate who had sentenced me hurried forward, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched his knees. Others followed. A cascade of deference and nervousness. Men who suddenly realized their provincial execution had attracted royal attention and had no idea whether to be honored or terrified. The king ignored them all. His eyes never left mine. My stepmother was there in the crowd. I could see her now, her face a mask of carefully composed righteousness. My father stood beside her, looking smaller than I remembered, diminished by proximity to real power. My half-siblings clustered nearby, their earlier cruelty replaced by uncertainty. They had expected a simple burning, a quick erasure of family shame. They had not expected this. The magistrate began to speak, his voice wavering as he tried to explain the situation to a man who had not asked for explanation. He detailed the accusations, the evidence, the legal precedents that supported the sentence. He spoke of protecting the community from evil, of upholding sacred law, of doing his duty to both church and crown. His words tumbled over each other in his eagerness to justify, to defend, to somehow make this appear righteous in the face of that silent judgment. The king let him finish. Patient as stone, he waited until the magistrate ran out of words and stood breathing hard, his face flushed with exertion and anxiety. Then, and only then, did the king speak. His voice was not loud. He did not shout or thunder, but it carried across the square with perfect clarity, resonating in a way that made every person present feel as if he was speaking directly to them. It was a voice that had commanded armies, negotiated with foreign powers, sentenced traitors, and promised lovers. It contained multitudes. What is her name? The question hung in the air. The magistrate blinked, confused by this divergence from the script he had prepared. He glanced at my stepmother, at my father, at the papers in his hand that listed my crimes, but apparently not my identity. She is the bastard daughter of Lord Aldrich, Your Majesty. She has no true name, only... I asked what her name is. The repetition was quiet, but something in it made the magistrate step back. The king had not raised his voice, had not shown any obvious anger, but the air around him seemed to crystallize with warning. This was not a man accustomed to repeating himself, and doing so indicated a patience wearing dangerously thin. My father stepped forward, his courage apparently found in the necessity of the moment. He bowed, not as low as the magistrate, but low enough to show deference. When he spoke, I heard the shame in his voice, the discomfort of having to acknowledge me before royalty. Her name is Ilara, Your Majesty. She has lived in my household since her mother's death. The accusations against her are serious, and we have followed all proper legal channels. Enough. One word, and my father's mouth snapped shut. The king moved forward, and the crowd parted before him like water before a ship's bow. He walked to the platform, climbed the steps with that same fluid grace, and suddenly he was there, close enough that I could smell leather and pine and something wilder underneath. something that spoke of forests and moonlight and ancient things. Up close, he was even more overwhelming. The force of his presence made me dizzy, made the ropes binding me to the stake feel insubstantial. He reached out and I flinched, instinctively, but his hand moved past my face to the collar around my neck. His fingers traced the cold iron and his jaw tightened, muscles jumping beneath skin. "Who placed this on you?" His voice was quieter now, meant only for me, though I knew the crowd was straining to hear. I tried to speak and found my throat had closed. I swallowed, tasted blood from my split cheek, tried again. "My stepmother, when I was 10, she said." I know what she said. His fingers remained on the collar and I felt a strange warmth spreading from his touch, traveling down through my body like whiskey burning its way to my stomach. His eyes, so dark and deep, searched my face, reading something there that I did not understand. When he spoke again, it was not to me but to the crowd, his voice once again carrying that terrible authority. "This woman is under my protection. The accusations against her are baseless, born of fear and prejudice. I am taking her into my custody." The crowd erupted. Voices rose in protest, in shock, in outrage. My stepmother pushed forward, her composure finally cracking, her face twisted with fury that was all the more frightening for being genuine. She had wanted me dead, I realized, not just gone, but erased, and this intervention threatened to undo everything. "Your Majesty, you cannot know what she is, what she has done. The evidence is clear, the witnesses numerous. She is a danger to everyone around her, a corruption that must be cleansed." Silence. The king did not shout, but the word landed like an axe blow. My stepmother stopped mid-sentence, her mouth still open, her hands outstretched in supplication. The king descended from the platform, and I watched him approach her with the detached fascination of someone watching a predator close in on prey. "You put an iron collar on a child. You raised her in shame and isolation. You taught your household to treat her as less than human. And now, you would burn her to hide your cruelty behind righteousness." Each sentence was a lash, delivered with surgical precision. My stepmother went pale, then red, her hands beginning to shake. My father tried to step forward to defend his wife, but the king's gaze swung to him and he froze. "And you? You created her, abandoned her, then condemned her for existing. What kind of man cannot protect his own blood?" My father had no answer. He looked at the ground, at his feet, anywhere but at the king's face or mine. In that moment, I felt something break inside me, not painfully, but with the clean snap of a bone setting properly after a bad break. All my life, I had wanted his acknowledgement, his love, some sign that I mattered to him. Now I saw the truth. He was weak, had always been weak, and his weakness had shaped my entire existence. The king turned back to the platform, to me still bound to the stake, blood drying on my face and the white shift marked with dirt and damage. He looked at me and I looked back, and something passed between us in that gaze, something I had no words for but felt in every nerve. Then he spoke words that changed everything. "Unbind her. She will not burn. She is my queen." The shock that rippled through the square was almost visible, a wave of disbelief and horror and awe. My queen, not my subject, not under my protection, not my ward, my queen. The words carried implications that went far beyond simple rescue, that spoke of recognition and claim and a future I could not begin to imagine. My legs gave out. If not for the ropes holding me upright, I would have collapsed. My vision swam, darkness creeping at the edges, the world narrowing to the single point of his presence. Queen, he had lifted me from the dust before everyone, transformed the accused into the untouchable, and the magnitude of it was more than my mind could process. The guards on the platform stood frozen, uncertain whether to obey the king's command or their local authority. The king's patience, already thin, snapped. He returned to the platform in 3 long strides, drew a blade from his belt and cut my bonds himself. The ropes fell away, and I stumbled forward, caught by hands that were surprisingly gentle for someone who moved with such violence. "Can you walk?" His voice in my ear, quiet and intimate, sending shivers down my spine. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he kept one hand on my elbow as he guided me down the steps. The crowd parted again, but this time their faces held different expressions. Fear, yes, but also calculation. A bastard might be burned, but a queen, even an unexpected one, commanded respect. We walked through the square, through streets that had jeered at me hours before but now fell silent. The king's men materialized around us, forming an escort I had not noticed arriving, armored soldiers who moved with the same predatory grace as their leader. They created a barrier between us and the crowd, a moving wall of protection and warning. A carriage waited at the edge of the square, black lacquered wood with the royal crest emblazoned in silver on the door. The king handed me inside with the formal courtesy reserved for nobility, and then he climbed in after me, filling the enclosed space with his presence. The door closed, the carriage lurched into motion, and I sat across from the man who had just upended my entire existence, wearing a blood-stained shift and an iron collar, with no idea what happened next. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could not look at him directly, the intensity of his attention still too overwhelming. Instead, I focused on my hands, on the rope burns around my wrists, on the way my fingers trembled despite my efforts to still them. The carriage rattled over cobblestones, carrying us away from the square, away from the manor, away from everything I had known. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it, too raw and too desperate. He was silent long enough that I thought he might not answer, that perhaps asking had been a breach of some protocol I did not understand. But then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and when I finally dared to glance up, his expression was unreadable. "Because you did not beg?" I blinked, confused by the answer. He continued, his voice low and considering. "I have watched 100 people face death. Most beg. They plead, they bargain, they offer anything to avoid the inevitable. But you stood silent. Even bleeding, even bound, you did not break. That is rare. That is not a reason to make someone a queen." The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I waited for anger, for retribution, for some sign that I had overstepped. But instead, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. "No, it is not." "Then why did you say it?" He sat back, studying me with that unsettling focus. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested truth being offered, rare and valuable. "Because the moment I saw you, I knew. This is not something I can explain with reason or logic. It simply is. You are mine, and I am yours, and all the laws of men and kingdoms cannot change that." The certainty in his voice should have frightened me. This man I had never met, who I knew only through stories and reputation, was claiming me with absolute conviction. But instead of fear, I felt something else stirring beneath the shock and exhaustion. Recognition, perhaps, a sense of rightness that made no sense but felt true nonetheless. I am not suitable to be queen. I am a bastard. I have no training, no education, no... You have survived 19 years in a house that wanted you invisible. You have endured cruelty and isolation without losing yourself. You faced death with dignity. That makes you more qualified than most who are born to the title. His words settled over me like a blanket, warm and disorienting. I wanted to believe them, wanted to accept this impossible rescue. But years of being told I was worthless created a wall of doubt that could not be dismantled in a single conversation. Your court will never accept me. My court accepts what I tell them to. Accept. The people will call me the Witch Queen. Let them. Names are just breath and sound. They cannot diminish you unless you allow it. I do not know how to be what you need. At this, he reached across the space between us and touched my chin, tilting my face up so I had to meet his eyes. The contact sent electricity through my skin, a jolt that made my breath catch. I need you to be exactly what you are. Nothing more, nothing less. The rest, we will figure out together. The carriage continued its journey, carrying us toward a future I could not imagine, and I sat across from a man who had called me his queen with absolute certainty. Wearing a blood-stained shift and an iron collar, with rope burns on my wrists and hope blooming cautiously in the wreckage of my chest. I did not know what tomorrow would bring. I did not know if I could survive the scrutiny of court, the weight of a crown, the expectations of a kingdom. But for the first time in my life, I was not facing the unknown alone. And perhaps that was enough to begin with. The journey to the capital took 3 days. We stopped at inns along the way, and at each one the king commanded the finest rooms while I remained largely hidden, still in that white shift, though cleaner now, still wearing the collar that marked my past. His men treated me with careful respect, uncertain of my status, but wise enough not to risk their king's displeasure. At night, I lay in beds, softer than any I had known, staring at ceiling beams and wondering if this was real or some fever dream born of smoke and fear. The king kept his distance, physically at least. He did not press for intimacy or demand explanations, but his presence was constant, a weight I felt even through closed doors. He had claimed me, and that claim hung in the air like incense, impossible to ignore. During our brief conversations over meals, he asked me questions. Not about magic or accusations, but about myself. What I liked to read, though I admitted I had taught myself from stolen books. What made me laugh, though the answer came slowly and uncertain. What I dreamed of, and to this I had no answer at all, because I had never allowed myself dreams. On the 3rd day, the capital rose on the horizon like a crown of stone and smoke. It sprawled across hills, massive walls enclosing what looked like an entire world unto itself. Towers reached for the sky, pennants snapping in the wind. The palace sat at the highest point, a structure of such size and grandeur that my stomach clenched with renewed fear. I was meant to enter that place, to live there, to somehow become its mistress. The impossibility of it crashed over me like a wave. The king must have seen my expression because he moved to sit beside me, his shoulder nearly touching mine in the cramped carriage. His presence, once so overwhelming, had become almost comforting in its consistency. It is not as frightening as it looks. You are lying to make me feel better. I am, he agreed, and I caught that flicker of amusement again. It is exactly as frightening as it looks, but you have survived worse than this. Have I? He turned to face me fully, and in the close quarters of the carriage I could see details I had missed before. Fine scars along his jaw. A small imperfection in his left eyebrow where hair no longer grew. Lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. He was not young, I realized, though not old either. Perhaps 30, perhaps a few years more. Old enough to have lived, to have seen war and peace, love and loss. You have survived being unwanted your entire life. That is a death of 1,000 cuts, slow and relentless. The court will try to cut you too, but their blades are dull compared to what you have already endured. His certainty should have felt arrogant, but instead it felt like truth. I thought of my father's indifference, my stepmother's cruelty, my siblings' casual dismissal. I thought of the collar around my neck, heavy and cold, a constant reminder of my place. And I thought of the stake, of rough hands binding me, of the crowd's eager faces waiting for my death. Yes, I had survived worse. The capital swallowed us whole. We passed through gates manned by soldiers in polished armor, through streets packed with people who stopped to stare at the royal carriage. Word of the king's return must have spread because crowds lined the route to the palace, calling out greetings and cheering. I stayed back from the window, not ready to be seen, not ready for whatever scrutiny awaited me. The palace gates opened like jaws, and we rolled into a courtyard paved with white stone. Servants appeared immediately, a choreographed dance of bows and efficiency. The carriage door opened, and the king stepped out first, then turned to offer me his hand. I took it, feeling dozens of eyes fix upon me as I emerged into daylight wearing a simple dress the king had procured at the last inn. Plain blue wool that marked me as nobody special. The iron collar was still locked around my neck, and I saw several people notice it, confusion flickering across their features. A woman approached, older and formidable, her dress marking her as someone of high rank within the household. She curtsied to the king, then looked at me with unconcealed curiosity and a hint of disapproval. Your Majesty, we were not expecting... This is Ilara. She will be my queen. Prepare the royal apartments and have the seamstresses attend to her immediately. She will need a complete wardrobe suitable for her station. The woman's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, the only sign of her shock. Years of court training kept her expression otherwise neutral as she curtsied again. lower this time, though I caught the tightness around her mouth that suggested displeasure or disbelief, or both. "Of course, Your Majesty. May I ask when the wedding is to take place?" "Soon. The exact date will be announced after consultation with the council. For now, ensure Ilara has everything she needs." He turned to me, and in front of all these watching servants, he lifted my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles with formal reverence. The gesture sent heat flooding through my body, inappropriate and undeniable. Then he was gone, striding into the palace with that predatory grace, leaving me standing in the courtyard with a woman whose job was now to somehow transform a bastard into a queen. "Follow me, please." Her voice was professionally neutral, revealing nothing of what she truly thought. I followed her through corridors that seemed to stretch forever, past walls hung with tapestries depicting battles and coronations, past guards who snapped to attention, past nobles who paused in their conversations to stare. The collar around my neck felt heavier with each step, and I resisted the urge to touch it, to hide it, to explain. The royal apartments were larger than the entire servants' wing where I had lived for 19 years. Chambers flowed into other chambers, each one decorated with luxury I had only glimpsed through windows. The bedroom alone could have housed my entire former family, with a bed so massive it looked like a small ship, canopied in deep blue velvet and piled with pillows. Windows overlooked the city, offering a view that seemed to stretch forever. "Your Majesty." The title directed at me sounded wrong. I turned to find the woman watching me with an expression that had shifted from neutral to calculating. "I am Katerina, the palace steward. It is my duty to manage the royal household and ensure everything runs smoothly. If you have any needs, any questions, you may ask me." "Thank you." My voice came out smaller than I intended, and I saw her notice, saw the flicker of something that might have been pity or disdain. She gestured to the furniture, to the luxury surrounding us. "The seamstresses will arrive within the hour. We will need to take measurements and discuss your wardrobe requirements. There are protocols to learn, etiquette to master, 100 small things that separate royalty from—" She stopped herself, but I knew what she had been about to say. That separated royalty from bastards, from nobodies, from girls who should have burned in public squares. "I understand. Do you?" She studied me with open skepticism now. "Forgive my frankness, but the court will not be kind. They will question everything about you. Your birth, your suitability, your very right to exist in this space. And that collar—" She gestured at my neck, at the iron that marked my past. "That tells a story that will be difficult to overcome. Then I will find a way to overcome it." The words surprised me as they left my mouth, carrying more certainty than I felt. But something in Katerina's expression shifted, a grudging respect replacing the skepticism. "Perhaps you will. The king chose you for reasons I do not pretend to understand. But he is not a fool despite what some may whisper. If he sees something in you, it is likely there." The seamstresses arrived in a flutter of fabric and measuring tapes, and for the next several hours I was poked and prodded and wrapped in countless materials while they debated colours and styles. They worked around the collar without comment, though I saw them exchange glances silently questioning. By evening I was exhausted and overwhelmed, my head spinning with information about court hierarchy and proper forms of address and 1,000 other details I was supposed to absorb. A maid brought dinner on a tray, elaborate dishes I did not recognize, and I ate alone at a table that could have seated 20. The food was delicious and tasted like ashes in my mouth. I kept thinking of the kitchens where my mother had worked, of simple bread and soup, of meals eaten standing up because bastards did not rate chairs at the family table. Night fell, and I found myself alone in that massive bed, surrounded by softness and luxury and feeling more isolated than I had in the coldest corner of my father's house. At least there I had known the rules. Here I was adrift, uncertain of every movement, every word. The king had saved me from fire, but what if I had simply traded one form of burning for another? A knock came at the door, soft but distinct. I called for entry, expecting a servant, and instead the king walked in, still dressed but with his jacket discarded, his shirt unlaced at the throat. He looked different here, in the privacy of these chambers, less like a force of nature and more like a man, though no less powerful for the humanity. "I wanted to check on you." The first day can be overwhelming. That is an understatement. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face, making him somehow more dangerous and more approachable at once. He moved to the window, looking out over the city lights that sparkled in the darkness. Katerina is efficient but harsh. If she gave you the speech about court politics and your unworthiness, ignore it. She gives that speech to everyone new. Does everyone new wear an iron collar marking them as less than human? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. He turned from the window, and I saw his jaw tighten, that muscle jumping again as it had in the square when he first touched the collar. That comes off tomorrow. I have sent for a blacksmith who specializes in such things. It should never have been put on in the first place. 10 years is a long time to wear a lie. Then 10 years is long enough. You are not what they tried to make you. You are what you choose to become. He crossed the room, and I found myself standing as he approached, some instinct making me meet him on equal footing rather than seated. He stopped close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell leather and pine, and that wild undertone that spoke of something more than human. I know this is not what you would have chosen. If you had been given options, becoming queen would not have topped the list. But I meant what I said. The moment I saw you, I knew. And I do not say things I do not mean. How can you know? You do not know me. I know you did not break when they tried to burn you. I know you carry yourself with dignity even when wearing chains. I know you speak truth even when it would be easier to lie. That is enough to start with. His hand rose, and this time when he touched the collar, his fingers were gentle, tracing the iron with something like regret. This is a lie, but what is between us is not. Give it time. Give me time. And give yourself permission to believe you might deserve something better than what you have been given. His words settled into my chest, warm and insistent, pushing against the walls of doubt and self-hatred I had built over 19 years. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to accept this impossible rescue and the even more impossible future it promised. But want and belief were different things, and the gap between them felt vast. I am afraid. The admission cost me something, revealing vulnerability I had learned to hide. But he simply nodded, as if fear were the most natural thing in the world. Good. Fear keeps us careful. It is when you stop being afraid that you make dangerous mistakes. He stepped back, creating space between us, and I felt the loss of his proximity like a physical thing. Sleep. Tomorrow we begin the real work, but tonight, just rest. He left as quietly as he had come, and I stood in the center of that vast bedroom, touching the collar around my neck, feeling the metal that had defined me for so long. Tomorrow it would come off. Tomorrow I would take the first step toward becoming someone new. But tonight I was still Ilara, the bastard daughter, the girl who should have burned. And I let myself mourn that girl even as I prepared to leave her behind. Morning came with birdsong and the sound of servants moving through the outer chambers. I woke in stages, confused by the softness of the bed, disoriented by the sunlight streaming through windows that were not mine. Then memory returned in a rush. Everything that had happened, everything that had changed, and I sat up with my heart pounding. A maid appeared almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for signs of waking. She helped me dress in one of the new gowns that had been completed overnight. Deep green velvet that fit perfectly and felt like wearing clouds. She brushed my hair until it shone, and when I looked in the mirror, I almost did not recognize myself. The collar stood out even more against the fine dress, a jarring note of iron against velvet, but the maid worked around it without comment. The blacksmith arrived mid-morning, a burly man with gentle hands and tools that looked more delicate than I expected. The king came with him, standing close as the smith examined the collar, testing its construction and weight. This is quality metalwork, ironically. Whoever made it knew their craft, but it was never meant to come off easily. Whoever commissioned this intended it to be permanent. My stepmother's face flashed through my mind, that satisfied smile as she fastened it around my 10-year-old neck. Protection, she had said, for your own good. The memory tasted like poison. Can you remove it without hurting her? The king's voice was tight with controlled anger, and the blacksmith nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. It will take time and care, but I can do it. She will need to stay very still. I sat in a chair by the window while the blacksmith worked, his tools clicking and rasping against metal. The king stood behind me, his hand on my shoulder, a steadying presence. The process took nearly an hour, careful filing and manipulation, working at the mechanism that had held the collar closed for so long. I felt it loosen gradually, the pressure around my throat easing, and then suddenly it was off, lifted away, and I could breathe fully for the first time in 9 years. My hand flew to my neck, touching bare skin that felt vulnerable and strange. There was an indent where the collar had rested, a groove pressed into flesh by years of constant weight. The blacksmith handed the collar to the king, who took it with both hands and an expression of such cold fury that even the experienced smith stepped back. "Burn it." "Your Majesty, it is valuable metal." I said burn it. Melt it down, if you must. But I never want to see this again. The smith bowed and retreated with the collar, leaving me sitting by the window with my hand still pressed to my newly freed throat. The king came around to face me, kneeling so we were at eye level, and his hands covered mine gently. "How does it feel?" "Strange, light, like I might float away without the weight holding me down." "Then let yourself float. You are not anchored to the past anymore." But even as he said it, I could feel the groove in my skin, the mark that would take time to fade. Some chains leave scars even after they are removed, and I wondered if I would ever truly feel free of that weight. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of activity. I met with the council, a gathering of old men who looked at me with varying degrees of skepticism and hostility. I learned court protocols from Katerina, who proved surprisingly patient when I asked questions, though still sharp when I made mistakes. I was fitted for more clothes, taught to walk properly, to sit properly, to speak properly, as if everything I had done for 19 years was suddenly wrong. The announcement of our engagement was made formally, and the court received it with the polite applause that masked true feelings. I could see the calculations behind their eyes. Noble families wondering how this changed the power structure, how they might use my questionable background to their advantage. Whispers followed me through corridors, words like bastard and witch and unsuitable that were meant to be overheard. Through it all, the king remained constant. He appeared at my lessons, observed my training, walked with me through gardens where courtiers pretended not to stare. He seemed determined to make clear that I was under his protection, that anyone who challenged me challenged him. It was both comforting and terrifying, this level of public commitment to someone he barely knew. One evening, as we walked alone through the palace library, I finally voiced the question that had been haunting me. "Why are you doing this?" The protection I understand, perhaps even some gratitude for not backing down at execution. But marriage? Making me queen? You could have sent me anywhere, given me a comfortable exile. Why bind yourself to someone so unsuitable? He stopped walking, turning to face me among shelves heavy with books and history. The library was empty at this hour, just us and the weight of accumulated knowledge. Do you know the old stories? The ones about true mates, about souls that recognize each other across lifetimes? Fairy tales, perhaps, or perhaps truths that we have forgotten how to believe. He moved closer, and in the intimate space between shelves, his presence was overwhelming. "I told you before. The moment I saw you, I knew. This is not rational. It is not political. It simply is. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have. We are connected, you and I, by something older than kingdoms or crowns. Call it fate, call it destiny, call it the whim of whatever gods you believe in. But I feel it here." He pressed a hand to his chest. "A certainty that you belong with me and I with you. Everything else is just details." I wanted to dismiss it as romance or delusion, but standing there in the quiet library looking into eyes that seemed to see straight through to my core, I felt it too. That pull, that recognition, that sense of rightness that defied logic. It terrified me more than any accusation or execution ever could because it suggested I might have something to lose. "I do not know how to do this. How to be what you need." Then we learn together. I have been king for 8 years and I still make mistakes. Being royal is not about perfection. It is about showing up every day and trying to do better than the day before. He reached out and took my hand, the touch sending familiar electricity through my skin. His thumb traced circles on my palm, a gesture that was both innocent and intimate. Besides, you underestimate yourself. You survived your father's house with your spirit intact. You faced death with dignity. You are learning court politics faster than I did. You are stronger than you believe. Or perhaps you see things in me that are not there. Or perhaps you have been told so often that you are worthless, that you cannot see your own value. The truth in his words stung like a slap. I pulled my hand back, wrapping my arms around myself defensively. He let me retreat, patient as always, waiting for me to work through whatever emotions churned beneath my surface. Everyone I have ever known has reinforced that I am less. My father by his silence, my stepmother by her cruelty, my siblings by their dismissal, the servants who pitied me but never defended me, even my mother by dying and leaving me alone in that house. How am I supposed to suddenly believe I deserve a crown? Your mother did not choose to die. Disease is not abandonment. I know that. Rationally, I know that. But the 10-year-old girl who watched her waste away did not understand rationality. She only understood that she was alone. He moved closer again, and this time when he reached for me, he pulled me against his chest, arms wrapping around me in an embrace that felt like shelter. I stiffened at first, unused to comfort, unused to anyone touching me with gentleness. But gradually I softened, letting my forehead rest against his shoulder, breathing in his scent and feeling the steady beat of his heart. You are not alone anymore. Whatever else happens, whatever challenges we face, you have me. And I do not abandon what is mine. The possessiveness in his words should have bothered me, but instead they felt like safety, like belonging, like finally having someone who would stand between me and the world. I let myself have that moment, that weakness, before pulling back and wiping at eyes that had grown suspiciously damp. I am sorry. I do not usually stop apologizing for having feelings. You were nearly burned alive a week ago. You are entitled to some emotional upheaval. His practical tone made me laugh despite myself, a watery sound but genuine. He smiled in response, that transformation that made him look younger and more human. There, that is better. I was beginning to think you had forgotten how. Forgotten what? How to laugh. How to let yourself feel joy instead of just surviving. He was right, I realized. I had spent so long in survival mode, getting through each day without thinking about happiness or pleasure, that I had forgotten those things were possible. The realization was both liberating and sad. We stayed in the library for hours that night, talking about things that had nothing to do with politics or courts. He told me about growing up as a crown prince, about the weight of expectations and the loneliness of power. I told him about my mother, the fragments of memory I had held onto, the way she used to sing while working. We shared stories like children trading treasures, each revelation bringing us closer, building bridges between his world and mine. By the time we returned to our separate chambers, something had shifted. We were no longer just king and rescued bastard. We were two people beginning to know each other, beginning to build something that might eventually feel like partnership. The wedding date was set for 6 weeks hence. Time enough to prepare, but not so long that opposition could organize. The announcement sent the palace into a frenzy of activity. Seamstresses worked day and night on my wedding gown. The kitchens planned elaborate feasts. Invitations were sent to noble families across the kingdom, many of whom would attend out of obligation while silently disapproving. My father received an invitation. So did my stepmother and half-siblings. I had mixed feelings about their attendance, wanting them to see what I had become while dreading their presence and the memories it would evoke. The king assured me I did not have to see them if I chose not to, that they would be seated far from the royal dais and kept under close watch. 2 weeks before the wedding, a messenger arrived from my father's estate. He requested an audience, claiming he had something important to discuss. The king left the decision to me, and after much internal debate, I agreed to see him. Perhaps I needed closure. Perhaps I needed to show him I had survived despite his indifference. Perhaps I just needed to hear him finally acknowledge my existence. He was shown to a small receiving room, one of the less formal spaces in the palace. I had Katerina present as witness, her sharp presence a reminder that I was not that helpless girl anymore. When my father entered, I barely recognized him. He had aged dramatically in the weeks since I had left, his face gaunt and shoulders stooped. He bowed deeply, a gesture I had never seen him make to me before. "Ilara, Your Majesty. I thank you for seeing me." His voice shook, and I realized with shock that he was afraid. Of me, of my position, of what power I now held over him and his household. The realization should have brought satisfaction, but instead I just felt hollow. "What do you want?" Blunt words, lacking courtesy, but I was done pretending politeness with this man. He flinched at my tone, hands twisting together nervously. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For not protecting you. For allowing your stepmother to treat you so cruelly. For my silence when you needed me most. I was weak and you suffered for my weakness. Yes, I did. I offered him nothing. No forgiveness. No understanding. Just that simple acknowledgement of truth. He deserved to hear it stated plainly, without softening. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I wanted you to know that I regret it. All of it. If I could go back, but you cannot. Regret is useless when it comes too late. Harsh words, but honest ones. I saw him absorb them, saw the pain they caused, and felt no sympathy. This man had stood by while I was bound to a stake. His regret was worth nothing. Your mother would be proud of you, the woman you have become. Do not speak of her. You have no right to invoke her memory now when you spent 19 years letting her daughter suffer. He bowed his head, accepting the rebuke. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. I will attend the wedding as invited, and then I will not trouble you again. I just wanted to see you one more time, to tell you that I am sorry, inadequate as those words are. He left without waiting for dismissal, a broken man shuffling out of a room that had witnessed his failure. I stood frozen, emotions churning too fast to name. Katerina approached quietly, her hand briefly touching my shoulder in a gesture of surprising gentleness. That was difficult, but necessary, I think. He is pathetic. Yes, but you are not. Remember that. Whatever he failed to be, you have become something remarkable despite him, not because of him. Her words helped a little. I let myself feel the anger and disappointment and loss, then set them aside. My father was part of my past, but he would not be part of my future. That was my choice to make, and I made it with clear eyes. The final weeks passed in a blur. I was fitted for the wedding gown, a creation of white silk and silver thread that seemed to capture light and hold it. I practiced the ceremony with the priest, learned the words I would speak, the vows that would bind me to the king before gods and kingdom. I met with foreign dignitaries who had arrived early, smiling through their thinly veiled curiosity about the bastard who would be queen. Through it all, the king was my anchor. He appeared at random moments, stealing time from his duties to walk with me or simply sit in comfortable silence. He showed me secret passages through the palace, taught me which courtiers could be trusted and which required watching. He told me stories of his own past, of mistakes made and lessons learned. And gradually, what had started as obligation began to feel like something deeper. The night before the wedding, I could not sleep. I stood at the window of my chambers, looking out over the city that would soon be mine to help govern, and felt the weight of tomorrow pressing down on me. A knock came at the door, and without waiting for answer, the king entered. He was dressed in just shirt and trousers, his feet bare, looking more like a man than a monarch. "I thought you might be awake." Too much to think about. Too many ways tomorrow could go wrong. He came to stand beside me at the window, his presence solid and reassuring. Tomorrow cannot go wrong. Whatever happens, we will face it together. That is what marriage means. I am afraid I will disappoint you, that you will realize you made a mistake. He turned me to face him, his hands on my shoulders, his expression serious. Listen to me carefully. You are not a mistake. What we have is not a mistake. Tomorrow, when you walk down that aisle, you will be claiming your place not just as my queen, but as your own person. Everything they tried to make you believe about yourself, every lie they told, every wound they inflicted, ends tomorrow. You are rewriting your story, and I am honored to be part of it. How can you be so certain? Because I know who you are, even if you do not yet know yourself. He pulled me close, and I let myself lean into him, drawing strength from his certainty. We stood that way for a long time, two people on the edge of forever, finding courage in each other. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if the gods themselves approved. I was dressed by a team of servants, each one working with precision to create the perfect image. The gown fit like water, the silver thread catching light with every movement. My hair was swept up and crowned with a circlet of white gold, simple but elegant. Without the iron collar, my neck felt naked, and the servants wove a delicate silver chain there instead, decorated with a single diamond that caught the light. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a queen. Not a bastard, not a witch, not a girl who should have burned. A queen with clear eyes and straight spine, and the beginning of belief in her own worth. The ceremony took place in the great cathedral, a soaring space of stone and stained glass. Every noble family in the kingdom seemed to be present, filling pews and balconies, all eyes turning as I entered on Katerina's arm. I had refused to ask my father to walk me down the aisle, had refused to give him that honor. Instead, I walked with the woman who had taught me how to navigate this new world, and that felt right. The king waited at the altar, and when his eyes found mine across the distance, everything else faded. The crowd, the cathedral, the weight of expectation, all of it became background noise. There was only him and me, and the future we were choosing together. I walked down the aisle with steady steps, each one a rejection of the past, an embrace of the future. When I reached the altar, he took my hand, and I felt that familiar electricity, that sense of rightness that defied explanation. The priest spoke words of binding and commitment, of duties and responsibilities. We repeated vows that kings and queens had spoken for centuries, promising partnership and faith. And when he finally pronounced us married, when the king leaned in to kiss me with a tenderness that made my breath catch, the cathedral erupted in cheers that sounded almost genuine. We walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and I caught sight of my father in the crowd. He was crying openly, grief and regret written across his face. My stepmother looked as if she had bitten something sour. My half-siblings appeared variously shocked, resentful, and fearful. I looked at them and felt nothing. They were strangers now, people who had once held power over me but no longer mattered. The feast that followed was elaborate and endless. Course after course appeared while musicians played and nobles made speeches. I sat beside my new husband, wearing a crown that still felt strange on my head, accepting congratulations from people who barely hid their disapproval. But none of it touched me. I was safe now, protected, claimed, and slowly, carefully. I was beginning to believe I deserved it. Late in the evening, when the celebration finally wound down, we retired to the royal chambers that were now ours to share. Servants had prepared the space with flowers and candles, creating an atmosphere of romance that felt both appropriate and overwhelming. The king dismissed them with a wave, leaving us alone for the first time as husband and wife. "How do you feel?" His question was gentle, giving me space to answer honestly. I considered for a moment, taking inventory of the emotions churning inside me. Terrified, exhausted, strangely hopeful, like I survived something impossible and am not quite sure what comes next. What comes next is rest. And tomorrow we begin the real work of ruling together. But tonight we just breathe. He helped me out of the elaborate gown, his movements careful and respectful. There was desire in his eyes, yes, but also patience, a willingness to let things unfold naturally. We lay together in the massive bed, his arms around me, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly safe. "Thank you," I whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For seeing me. For claiming me. For giving me a chance to become something more than what they tried to make me." His arms tightened around me and I felt his lips press against my hair. "You were always something more. I just helped you see it." Sleep came easily that night, wrapped in warmth and safety and the beginning of something that felt like love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new doubts. But tonight I was simply Alara, the girl who had survived fire and found a crown instead of ashes. And that was enough. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. I attended council meetings with the king, learning to navigate political waters that were treacherous and deep. I held audiences with common people, hearing their petitions and concerns, slowly earning a reputation for fairness and compassion. I studied law and history and economics, filling gaps in an education that had been neglected for 19 years. Some nobles continued to oppose me, whispers of witch and bastard following me through corridors. But others, seeing my dedication and the king's unwavering support, began to accept, if not embrace me. I made allies carefully, building relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear. Slowly, painfully slowly, I carved out a place for myself that felt earned rather than given. The king and I grew closer with each passing day. What had started as recognition deepened into partnership, and partnership slowly, carefully, transformed into love. He showed me patience when I doubted myself, strength when I faltered, humor when I took things too seriously, and I learned to trust him, to believe that his commitment was real and lasting. One evening, several months after the wedding, we walked through the gardens where we had first begun to really know each other. The roses were in full bloom, their scent heavy on the warm air. He pulled me close and I went willingly, no longer afraid of his touch or the feelings it stirred. Do you remember when I told you that you were mine from the moment I saw you? Yes, I was only half right. You were mine, yes, but I was also yours. I just did not know it until later. I looked up at him, at this man who had upended my world and given me a future I never dared imagine. And I realized that what I felt was no longer gratitude or obligation, but genuine love, messy and complicated and absolutely real. I love you. The words escaped before I could stop them, too raw and too honest. But instead of fear, I felt relief. He smiled, that transformation I had come to treasure, and kissed me with a passion that made my knees weak. Finally, I have been waiting to hear you say it. You never said it first. I said it every day. In every action, every protection, every time I chose you. But if you need the words, then know this. I love you beyond reason, beyond logic, beyond anything I have ever felt before. You are my queen, yes. But more than that, you are my heart. We stood in the garden until stars appeared overhead, wrapped in each other and in the love we had built from impossible circumstances. The girl who should have burned had become a queen. The bastard marked by iron had found her place. And the man who had claimed her had found himself claimed in return. As I look back on that day in the square, bound to a stake and facing death, I can hardly believe it was only months ago. That girl seems like a different person, someone I knew long ago rather than someone I was. She was broken by cruelty and marked by shame, but she survived. And in surviving, she discovered she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever believed. This story is not finished. There will be more challenges, more battles, more moments where I doubt whether I belong in this crown. But I face them now with partnership and love, with the knowledge that I am not alone. The king gave me a chance to rewrite my story, but I am the one who picked up the pen. To anyone reading this, anyone who feels broken or unworthy or trapped by circumstances they cannot control, know this, your story is not finished either. The world will try to tell you who you are, will try to reduce you to your worst moments or your greatest failures. But you get to choose. You get to decide who you become. It will not be easy, and there will be days when you want to give up. But keep going. Keep fighting. Keep believing that you deserve more than what others have decided you are worth. Because you do. We all do. And sometimes when you least expect it, when you have stopped hoping for rescue or redemption, something impossible happens. Not always in the form of a king with dark eyes and declarations of certainty, but in small moments of kindness, in unexpected opportunities, in the courage to stand tall even when your knees want to buckle. Magic is not real, but transformation is, and you have more power to transform your own life than you might believe. So if you found something in this story that resonated, if you saw yourself in these words, then leave your comment below. Share your thoughts, your reflections, your own stories of survival and transformation. We are all writing our narratives one page at a time, and sometimes it helps to know we are not alone in that writing. Like this video if it touched you, subscribe to hear more stories that speak to the heart, and remember that your ending is not yet written. You get to choose how your story unfolds, and I hope with everything in me that you choose to survive, that you choose to fight, that you choose to believe you are worth more than the world has told you. Because you are, you absolutely are.